This game is Tower of Druaga by Namco, part of their 1984 arcade game. Now, of all the games we'll be seeing in this episode, Tower of Druaga is certainly the most interesting. First of all, note that it actually has a detailed plot described in the introduction. If you read through this, you'll see that with its kidnapped princesses, golden armor, crystal rods, etc., this game introduces a lot of themes and plot points that will be used in later fantasy games. In fact, this is the first fantasy-themed game for the Famicom, and the arcade version is one of the very first fantasy games ever in Japan. Now, the object of the game is to scale the tower floor by floor until you reach the 60th floor, where you battle Druaga. There's certainly nothing original about this plot. In fact, it's basically the same as the old computer RPG game Wizardry. However, the execution of the game places it squarely in the tradition of arcade games like Pac-Man. The maze is given in a top-down view, while the characters are given in a side or frontal view. The characters are in sort of a foreshortened perspective, which would later become standard in Japanese RPGs. You advance from floor to floor by collecting the gold key, then killing any monsters in your way and advancing to the exit. You then repeat until you reach the 60th floor. Now, if all this sounds rather dull and repetitive, well, yes, it definitely is. But what makes this game interesting and different is that every level contains a hidden item. A certain action must be performed in order for a treasure chest to appear. Collecting the treasure chest will then give you an object. On early floors, the requirements are actually usually something pretty simple, such as killing a certain number of monsters. However, as you go higher up in the tower, the requirements become much less obvious. In fact, the game seems to take a certain sadistic pleasure in making the requirements unusual and slightly arbitrary. For example, in later levels, you might have to touch a certain wall, or even do something strange like hit the select button on your controller. Some treasures, such as the shoes found on level 2, are very helpful. The shoes will increase your speed, for example. Others, such as various swords and shields you'll collect later in the game, actually don't do anything by themselves. However, they are necessary to getting better treasures later in the game. While this game doesn't seem like much, it was enormously popular and enormously influential in Japan. For example, Nintendo would take this basic concept, improve on it vastly, and release it as The Legend of Zelda. Additionally, the concept of finding various sorts of useful objects and power-ups became quite ubiquitous in console video games in the near future. Obviously, Japanese RPGs made extensive use of this idea, but also platformers and action games like Castlevania, Metroid, etc., etc. Even Mario can power up by collecting mushrooms. And something else that's very interesting is that this game transfers the player's interest from the ostensible goal of defeating the wizard to that of uncovering all the game's secrets. Tower of Druaga introduced gamers to the mindset of fetishistically collecting hard-to-find objects in video games. This idea carried over into all genres, not just Japanese RPGs, but even straight-ahead action games like the Grand Theft Auto series. Rather than playing games just for pleasure or trying to get a high score, the object was now to complete the game by finding every secret or hidden item. Now, oddly, this game was a pretty big success in Japanese arcades. However, this idea for a video game really seems much more suited to consoles rather than arcade games. In fact, more than any other game released on the Famicom so far, Tower of Druaga really points towards the future of console gaming. Now, this game was not released in the United States, but in Japan, the Tower of Druaga franchise is actually considered to be one of Namco's more famous series. This really sort of underscores some of the differences between Western and Asian gamers. Japanese gamers really seem to sort of have the patience to sort of grind their way through a long and repetitive game in order to get some kind of ultimate reward at the end. And there are a lot of things that make this game not very enjoyable to play. It really doesn't seem to play fair with you. For example, in the later levels, a lot of wizards will be able to cast spells across the room. They often seem to materialize right next to you and suddenly zap you. I don't know how many times I was suddenly zapped by a wizard right as I was entering the door to exit the room. Additionally, Gilgamesh takes an excruciatingly long time to sheathe and unsheath his sword. So if you were to sit down and actually try to play this game through from beginning to end, I can't see you'd probably have a very enjoyable time. Still, its influence on the Japanese gaming culture was huge and undeniable. Even the character's name, Gilgamesh, looks forward to the Japanese RPG tradition of taking names and places from various world, mythology, and religions and sort of inserting them willy-nilly into a fantasy setting. The basic combat mechanic, using a sword and a shield and killing monsters by running into them, was reused in Zelda a few months in the near future. And of course, Japanese RPGs such as Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest owe a huge debt to this game. So even though this game is not actually very fun, its influences can be felt pretty much everywhere in the gaming world, right on down to the present day.